Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Business Wingmen Show. I'm Steve Smith, and I'm joined by my co-host, Travis Smith. And for those of you that may be listening for the first time, you can find us pretty much anywhere, in addition to going to our regular website at businesswingmen.com. You can also find us on any one of the podcast stations you might get all of your regular material from. So if you can type out Business Wingmen, you can find us. And it's well worth doing it because to date we're nearing in on 130 episodes of some really high quality professional development content. That's what we're out here talking about.
High quality.
High quality. Yeah, actually. Well, I mean, look, figure it. Most people, as they're coming up or getting into new and different situations along their career path, whether they're working for a company or they own their own, the chances of you making the same mistakes that a million people before you have done is, it's going to happen. So by listening to shows like this, you can sidestep all that stuff. And if you're going to make your own mistakes, but just make unique ones, don't step in the same hole that many folks before you have stepped in. And that's kind of the reason we do this, to help people, fast track their success and get through some of those things and operate on becoming better and reaching your full potential. So today, one of the things that we're going to talk about, which this is something that some people just chronically live with and other people, depending on the circumstances, can kind of fall themselves into. But it happens with anybody that's in a leader role, an authority role, a role that requires you on a regular basis to have to make decisions. And it's the whole idea of becoming indecisive, to that point where you're immobile, where you're basically putting the brakes on the rest of the train because you can't decide on what to do and get out of the way and let those that are supposed to do it, do what they do. So we're going to talk about that. What causes that to happen? And what can you do if you find yourself having that as a perennial problem? Like, I'm not good at making decisions, so I've just decided not to make any. So with that as a lead-in, Travis, what do you see? I mean, you've got clients, you've got business clients that you work with. How much is indecisiveness a problem for you?
I see this more often than I think I would like to appreciate. And where it usually comes up is it's just kind of this apathetic approach. Sometimes people know that they need to do certain things, or they need to put a new strategy in place, or they have a underperforming employee. And rather than dealing with it, they just kind of let it ride.
Right.
And it's one of these things where maybe there's, more important things going on in the organization, but it's almost like this idea of, well, if it's not going to blow up the business, and I'm still going to have my job in the next couple months,
right,
I'm just not going to deal with that right now.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with you. I mean, there's all kind of reasons why people avoid making decisions. Sometimes it's because they just don't have a really good, they're not informed of all the available outcomes, the alternatives they can choose from. So, and look, you probably known people in your personal life or in your social life who they have problems medically. So they go out and they find a doctor, and maybe they don't like what that doctor has to say. So they go find another doctor, and 6 and 8 and 10 doctors later, they're still looking for what they want as the response. They can't make a decision based on what they've heard so far because it's not what they're looking for. So that's a form of being really indecisive, because all the time you're spending doing that, you're not curing whatever the medical problem is. And when you go into business, what I find sometimes is people who will tell you that they don't like making decisions because they don't feel like they're good at them. The one time where they will make a quick decision is when the building's on fire, or there's something going on in the business that if they don't jump on it quickly, things are going to get really bad really quick. And so that seems to cause people to want to, say, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do something. But if there's no immediate urgency, a lot of times, I find that, like you said, people will kind of walk the problem down the road, and it's almost like they're waiting for it to either take care of itself or something jumps in the way that forces them to select one of probably many alternatives they've come up with and just go with it?
Well, I think the reason for that is that most people in business, especially from what I see, they're firefighters. And what I mean by that is, if my hair is not burning because of this in the moment, I'm not going to deal with it. Right. And what that ultimately means is that many of us are not thinking like a game of chess. We're not thinking 3, 4, 5 moves in advance. We're just dealing with the stuff that's right in front of us right now. And perhaps a lot of that is because that's what's coming down the ladder, right? The corporate ladder.
Right.
And I would really like, one of the things that I often see is with decisions that ultimately need to be made, but they're kind of inconsequential. It's like, it's not going to change the direction of the company one way or another. And the example I'll give is a company, a department, a manager knows that they need to get a new tool, a new software tool. There's going to be efficiencies there, but going out, finding the tool, going out, actually vetting the tool, going through it, right? Costing it out and all this kind of crap. It takes effort.
Yeah.
Right. But you want to know what is the weirdest thing that I've seen? I would love to get your perspective on this. Is where I see the indecision come up is not at the beginning of that process in the example I just gave. So, we need a new tool. The tool we have right now sucks. We all hate it. We all know this. That's not where indecision rears its ugly head. It's usually when they have gone out, they've identified whatever it is, 5, 6 different vendors. Those vendors have come in and they've given their proposal, right? They've done their demos.
Right.
And then it's just like the thing goes crickets right there.
Yes.
Right. And then all of a sudden you're 6 months out of that demo experience.
Right.
And you're still doing the same shit you were doing 6 months before that.
Right. Right.
And that is where I almost always see indecision take place.
All right. So when that unfolds, as you just laid it out,
I laid it out so good, wasn't that? I mean, it really was a nice story.
I mean, I get this big, ugly picture in my head right now. So when I've run into situations or been a part of environments where something like that has happened, it's usually, from what I've experienced, comes down to a couple of things. One, the person who has to make the decision about this may not have been the person to initiate all these actions. It may have been somebody in a lower department that said, hey, we badly need to upgrade this software. And the owner says, okay, fine, do some research, figure out what's out there. We'll make a decision. All that, just as you laid it out, people come in, they present, they give all the information. And what I found is sometimes the reason those decisions don't ever go anywhere is because the owner, who's responsible for the investment, for making, giving the approval as to who you're going to buy from, has they don't have any investment in that outcome. That, somebody in their department has said, yeah, we need it. Okay, I get it. But they're not personally invested in it. And so what they're almost waiting for is one of the vendors to show up and be such a wow factor that all the rest of them are just forgettable. And it's easy to say, okay, go with them. But if you have everybody come in and they're about the same, they're good, but they're about the same. Now that requires some deliberation. And they're just not invested enough in the thing to want to put the time and effort into it. So unless they cede that decision over to the department head that brought it up and say, okay, you've seen everything I've seen, you tell me who you want, and we'll go with it. If they don't do that, it could sit on the owner's desk for an eternity until that department person keeps bugging them and saying, okay, what are we going to do with this?
Well, and think about how you just laid out the very end of that. They keep having conversations on the matter without a conclusion.
Right. Yeah.
So think about, as we always say, time is money.
Right.
Think about how much time, which we can never get back, by the way. Money, you could argue you can get back, but you're never going to get that back. You're just continuing to waste that time. And more often than not, I would like to think, in my own experiences from what I've seen, it's on things that really don't matter. Meaning, if we would have just made the decision earlier, that would have allowed us to move on and focus on other items, right? But what ends up happening is we don't make a decision over here. We don't make a decision over there. And then all of this stuff just kind of starts to pile up to the point where we have 4, 5, 6 things that are all simultaneously not being dealt with.
Right.
And the biggest problem that happens in those moments is it affects your employees. People can see that kind of crap immediately.
Well, and especially like in the example you gave, if the people in the department that the guy brought the recommendation up for, if they're really invested and looking forward to getting better software to work with, and maybe the department guy has actually even teed it up with them and said, okay, we're going to get this done. We got all these vendors coming in. We're going to have these meetings. They're waiting in anticipation that a decision is going to be made and this thing is going to finally come to an end. And when that doesn't happen, now they start questioning the motives of the people at the top. Don't you see why this is necessary? Why would you sit on this? So when you start having that questioning of what's the matter with you're not moving forward, that's when that erodes trust within the organization, if it's a perpetual problem. Now, if it happens on one oddball thing that nobody's ever dealt with before, you can make a case for that. But if it's a perpetual problem, then I think at some point people start filling in the gaps on why decisions can't be made at all or in a timely manner.
Well, I think the other issue, using that kind of quick story I had shared in the analogy, is how often when we find ourselves in situations where a decision's not being made down the road, if we really took the time to do a postmortem and kind of step back a ways, in the times where I have done that and I've made that mistake, meaning I spent some time up front, but then found myself not making a decision kind of down the road.
Right.
It was almost always because when I started the process with whatever it was, I wasn't as educated as I should have been on whatever the topic was.
Right.
And as a result, I got other people involved, other vendors involved, hoping that by meeting with them and hearing what they were offering, that would give me insight on what I needed for our solution.
You would get the clarity to all of a sudden see the way out.
and that is the worst way to approach it. It's kind of like this. It would be like if you're like, all right, I know we need to hire a marketing person, but I don't really know what that person needs to be doing.
Right.
I don't know all the details. I mean, I know we need a little bit of social media here and there, but outside of that, I'm not sure. So
you don't have clarity about the outcome of the decision you're about to make. So right. It's almost safer not to make that decision.
Well, I disagree. So what people, at least in this second story I'm now sharing about the hiring thing, what people will do is they'll start interviewing people using that same idea I just brought up about the software tool.
Right.
They start interviewing people hoping that they find somebody that they're going to like. And in doing so, because now we're chummy, they'll figure out if that person's the right culture fit. But the entire time, they're completely obfuscating the actual skills versus the job.
Yeah.
And this happens all the time.
All right. So there is another element, and I'm going to attempt to explain this without going too deep and getting off track. But when you invite in too much feedback, too much opinion, too much data, you've just completely covered yourself up with information about the decision you're trying to make. You enter into overwhelm. It's just too much. You're underwater. You don't know where to go next. When you do that, your brain actually works against you to help you gain the clarity and make the decision going forward. And it's because overwhelm is an emotion that emits a lot of fear. When people get overwhelmed, they get afraid. What's going to happen? How am I going to get out of this? And when that happens, the emotional side of your head overrides the critical thinking side of your head, because it goes into this thing called fight or flight. When you're really threatened, you either freeze or you attack. And a lot of people freeze. And so all cognitive thought, which leads to decision making, comes to a halt. So when I see people getting into that, what I recommend is you only need a certain amount of information to make an informed decision. You need to know what that is. What is it you need to know before you can make a decision that's probably going to render a better rather than worse decision, and cut off the amount of information coming at you? Because at some point it's redundant or it's irrelevant, but it's just like throwing wood chips on the pile. And so you really got to learn how to decide, okay, what do I need to know in order to be able to put me in a position where I can decide amongst options or decide to go forward. And I think people, they misconstrue that because they think, okay, if I still haven't been able to figure it out, I need more data. I need to talk to more people. I need to get more input. And that doesn't actually help. I mean, sure, you go to 2 or 3 people that are really schooled up in the area that you're trying to figure out, and you get that. But if you add 4, 5, 6, 7 people to the list, it's not going to do what you think it's going to do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, more is not always better.
No. Right. And in decision making, I think you're right about that.
Well, because I think a lot of times it goes back to what do we understand the need is? And to your comment that you made a moment ago, I like the idea that before we actually go into the decision-making process. So again, we're using that example from earlier about we need to go get a software tool. Maybe it's a new accounting tool. Okay. What's really important is that before you go into that and you start looking at your options, you go in with 2 to 3 main things you're looking to achieve, right? Keep it simple. I need the tool to be able to communicate with our ERP program. I need the tool to be able to take credit card payments. I need the tool, right? So,
right.
As long as you go in knowing what your primary focus is and what you're trying to achieve and keeping that simple, I think you will have a much better chance of getting to the point of being comfortable making a decision rather than just going in kind of like eyes and ears wide open, head just kind of, I'm just going to listen and learn. It's
right.
like, well, okay, like I get it, but you also have to know what you're looking for to a degree. You can't just go into this thing like, I'm just really looking forward to being educated.
Right. Yeah, no, it's and look, every day, if you're in an authoritative position within a company or you're the owner of the company, you're probably making between 20 and 30 decisions a day, many without even knowing about it. It's just rote stuff. Somebody comes to you and says, so-and-so called, they want to have lunch with you, is Friday open? That's a decision. So it could be basic stuff like that, or it could be the more complicated stuff like a client, calling you up and saying, hey, we can't deal with this anymore. If you can't come in here Monday morning and straighten this thing out, then we're going to have to find another supplier, so you can get kind of almost hostile type situations that you have to decide over. Yep. But to me, decision making at its roots is a behavior. It's a behavior style, pattern that if you can figure out what works for you in terms of what you need to know, who you need to involve, and what kind of timelines you're under, then I think over time you will get better at it. It is one of these skills that you can improve in with practice.
And, you think about what you just said with the supplier comment. That's one of the things when we're talking about indecision and how that can negatively impact relationships.
Right.
It's really easy for people in these moments to take the situation or the intent, right, and take that in a direction that perhaps is not what you intended. You've met with a supplier 3-4 times. You're having good discussion, but you still can't get to a decision. Some people might walk away from that feeling like you wasted their time. And so you do, and I would say the same thing with employees. You have to be mindful of the fact that by being indecisive and not getting to a point of a resolution or a decision, that you are potentially risking the relationships and or how people look at you moving forward.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm curious, we've talked about some of the negative outcomes or the impact, if you will, that comes as a result of being indecisive. If you were sitting down with an employee right now and that person was, they're on that nice kind of the psychologist chair. Maybe they have a little blindfold over. This is just a nice moment. They're sharing truths with you, and they say, boss, I'm really indecisive, and it's starting to negatively impact my career. What 2 pieces of advice would you give that person in order to turn around that behavior?
I think I would start by asking them to tell me what they believe prevents them from making a timely decision. What is it that goes on in your head in that moment that makes you want to pull back? And then find out. You have to find out, to the best of your ability, what's driving the need for them to not move forward. I mean, because let's face it, if you don't make a decision, that's a decision, right?
Right.
So there's something at play with them that makes them think that it's a better alternative to not decide than to decide and then decide, then see what comes as a result of it. So I think you really have to understand what's causing them, what feelings, what thoughts, what gets in the way of them being able to just say, okay, I know this and I know what we need. This is a good option. Let's just run with that. You have to find that out. That's number 1. Number 2, I think you have to ask them, do you have a good method of arriving at a decision? Do you have a few steps that you can incorporate on a regular basis that will lead you to just the right amount of information based on the circumstances or the event that you have to decide over, that will confidently let you say yes or no? Because the decision doesn't always have to be yes. It could be a no, but it is a decision nonetheless. So first, you got to figure out what's blocking them. The second thing you got to figure out is what methodology are they using to be able to put themselves in a position where they can confidently say, okay, I know what I'm doing at this point.
Boy, I don't even need to continue this discussion at this point. That was great. Did you read that out of a book or something?
No, that comes with 40 plus years of doing this kind of stuff.
So I really liked in particular the first part. It's one thing to sit there and be like, hey, I suck at something. I'm not great at something. I have room to improve at something.
Right.
But if you don't really understand what the bedrock reason is for that experience or that lack of ability,
right,
your ability to actually improve it moving forward is going to suffer. And what you may find is, even though, your second option, which was, utilizing some sort of a methodology that you're using time and time again to get to better decision making, right? The thing is, if you don't understand in the first place why you struggle making decisions, the methodology that you use after the fact, it may help improve, but more than likely what you're going to find is a little bit down the road, you're going to slip back in your old habits because you don't truly understand what's causing that in the first place.
Oh yeah, look, I could sit down and help you lay out a method, 3-4 steps max, that you could implement in 10-15 minutes. And it would give you enough to be able to say, okay, this is obviously the best thing to do. But the problem is, when you get to that point of saying, yes, we're going to do this, or no, I think we should not do this, that's a trigger point. And if you can't pull that trigger, then everything you've done up to that point is a waste of time. And it's the trigger pulling that is very emotional in nature. And what happens is people psychologically revert back to times when they made a hasty decision that ended up in calamity of some sort. And they will always remember that when they decided too quickly, which, by the way, deciding too quickly and not deciding at all kind of run concurrent, because it's both like, we don't want to do that. So you just stay frozen. So when they remember back of, oh man, I made this decision and it cost me my job, or, I lost a lot of money, or I lost a friend, or, something like that just kind of lingers with them. That's what can cause people to shy away, especially from making important decisions. And so you really do have to help them understand what that was so they can make their peace with it and recognize that nobody bats 1,000. The best decision makers in the world, if they're batting more than 500, they're probably ahead of the game.
Well, but I think, again, that goes back to process, right? there's a lot to be said. So, have you ever talked with someone about when you're going into a meeting, for example, if you go into that meeting cold, you will often find that you're unprepared.
Yes.
However, if you go into a meeting and you've spent hours in preparation for them, have you ever noticed it's almost like people are over prepared?
Right. Because now what they want to do is they want to demonstrate to everybody else everything they prepared for.
Yes.
Yes.
So it's interesting. It's finding the sweet spot in between those two pieces. And I used the meeting as the example, but the same is true with making decisions. We're not saying that you have to go into making a decision having every single fact already known and understood, but you should have a baseline for what you're trying to achieve and what that means for you and the organization. And then as you move forward, you surround that with ideas, or, this supplier approaches it that way, this other one does it that way, right? And then that's how you can kind of better understand, well, this solution is really the best for what I'm trying to achieve.
Right.
So right. I don't think the message that we're sharing today is one of, you've got to spend all this time in research getting your information squared so that you can make a decision that's minute and really doesn't affect anything.
Right.
That's not the point. But I do like your idea on having a methodology and how you approach things like that.
Well, one of the things that I teach people that go through my management training program, and it has to do with decision making, with conflict resolution, with all of these things where you, as the authority figure in the room, may all of a sudden be pulled into some situation where people are looking at you and saying, you have to decide, you have to make a decision because we have a problem here. And since you have the stripes, we want to know what to do. And so I teach this really simple little process called the Q&L method. And it means for the entire time that you're engaged with whoever you're engaged with, that's going to result in you having to make a decision, you're only doing two things. You're asking questions and you're listening. And questioning should be about 10% of your time. The listening needs to be about 90%. Because it doesn't matter what you know prior to coming into that situation. It matters what you can learn about what's going on, what the issue is, what people think they want to resolve, and what the options are for resolving the problem, upgrading the system, taking a different course on a project, any of those kind of things. So I can walk into almost any meeting where I'm completely unfamiliar with the function of the meeting or the discipline, the industry, and things like that. And by asking a few basic questions and listening to what comes back, sometimes listening to what's not coming back, you can get a really good handle on what the primary issue is. And then when people start throwing out, well, we should be doing this, this, and that, then you can start evaluating what's there. Because ultimately, most of the time, people shy away from decisions because they're contributory in making the process too complicated. And if you can drill things down to their basic level, and I'll glom onto that example that you threw out about upgrading software. Okay, when I was in some of the companies I worked for prior to now, that was a constant question. We need, these software programs have now, there's so many revisions to them that we've got antiquated stuff. So we need to upgrade, or maybe we need to go to a different supplier. So you'd have people in and they'd be telling you all this great stuff. Halfway through the process, they would be lopping on so many enhancements to the basic software. You've lost your mind in terms of what did we want the software to do originally? What was the primary reason we have that software in our system? We don't need all of these accessories that the manufacturers of this stuff have put on there because they're trying to add value and get an edge in the marketplace. We just need to know, if we bring this software in, will it bolt onto the legacy mainframe that we're working with? Will it talk to it? Or do we have to do a lot of manual override to get the information from point A to point B? And so sometimes the best people in the decision-making circle are the ones that actually know the least details about what's going on, because then they can sit there and concentrate on what is the problem to be solved and what is the simplest way to do it. And you can do that by simply asking some really in-depth questions and then just sitting back and waiting to see what comes back.
So I have a slightly different question that I'd like to ask, given the analogy you just shared. What if you were in a situation where it was the inverse? So you're the employee, and it's your boss that has this problem.
Oh, I'm glad you asked that, because I was actually thinking about that. Should we go in that direction? But I think that's a good one.
Yes, we should, because this happens all the time.
Right.
And think about it. When you're the employee and you're witnessing this, how frustrating is that? Especially if you've been tasked to go out and collect the data,
right,
and then nothing is done with it.
Yes.
That is obnoxious as all hell.
Okay. And I totally get it, because you spend a lot of time, you build up a lot of excitement about something that you're going to push forward, and then it just, you stops dead in its tracks and you can't move it forward. So here's what I learned how to do by making a lot of these mistakes, kind of just jumping forward, making assumptions that, you get cut off at the pass. The first thing to do is go talk to your boss at a high level and just say, look, you've asked me to go out and do this kind of stuff, which I'm more than happy to do. What I need to understand from you, what is the end result of this? What do you want to see that's going to make your decision process easy? Try to understand what they're looking for. Now, obviously, you're going out and getting information that they don't have, but I can tell you, everybody that instigates something like that and says, Travis, we're going to embark on this and we want you to go out and talk to these suppliers and get this information and come back in a week. They already know in their head what they want. They're just
looking for validation.
Yes, that's exactly right. So your job is to go in and figure out what that validation looks like. What is it you're looking for, so that I can make sure that I'm going out and asking the right questions? So that's number one. Number two, when you go out there, you've got to go out there looking and gathering and talking to people with the idea that I know what my boss is like. Is my boss a hip shooter? And that's somebody that basically makes the decision first and then looks to say, okay, did we do it right or not? But
these two guns
right
here.
Right. That's, they want to make decisions really fast and move forward. And maybe a week later, they'll think, oh, you know what? We really didn't think about that. So, but there are people out there like that. And then there's other ones that just want more data and more data and more data. And then the third ones are the ones that they have a limit as to what they can successfully use in making that decision. So if you're the person on their behalf that's going out and doing all this research, you've got to understand what kind of decision maker your boss is. Because if you know that, then you can make sure that you come back with stuff that's in alignment with what they're going to be most comfortable presiding over.
Yeah, that really was a very well-crafted and eloquent answer, but you really didn't answer my question.
What did I miss?
So the boss has a problem.
Yes.
He can't make decisions to save his life.
Right.
She can't make decisions, whatever it is.
Right.
How do you go in and address that?
Well, as I just will not repeat, but you have to have a foundational approach to it. Because at some point,
but you've already done that.
Okay. So
and they're just struggling to make that decision.
Right. So now you sit down with them and you present what you have. And, they're gnashing their teeth and they want to set another meeting to bring other people in. That's basically, you've been there before. That's basically where you have to sit down and say, okay, boss, when you first gave me this assignment, do you remember what I asked you? I asked you what you were looking for. This is what you told me. Okay. If that's still what you're looking for, because that's the problem we need to solve, these two do it with the most. They give you the most of what you're looking for to solve that problem. This one costs this one costs that, but this one here, it comes from a company that's got kind of a quasi reputation. These guys are the best of the best, but you're going to pay for it. So what you're basically doing is drilling down on a few basic criteria. Okay. Quality, cost, relevance. And you're helping your boss get to a point where it's obvious what the right answer is. That's the best way to deal with somebody who chronically sits on decisions because they just don't know what to do with them.
You're much more diplomatic than I am.
Yeah, but believe me, you could do what you innately feel, but it's just like, you're drop kicking it because it's not going to help the situation.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So, as we've been going through this discussion just a moment ago, we had the word validation had come up.
Right.
And I had a situation not too long ago, it was about a year and a half ago, where we got brought in with a client to do some very technical analysis work on a particular area of medical device engineering. And even though it wasn't a huge project, it was a fun project because we were really going to be able to get into the weeds and just dive in. But it was interesting because the whole time we're going through this project, we couldn't really figure out why they hired us to do it. Because this company has competent people all over the place.
Right.
Right. Well, we got to the end of the project, towards the end at least, and I finally I was like, you know what, rather than make the assumption, I'm just going to ask. And so this director said to me, and he's a really nice guy. I said, I'm just curious. You guys have all the ammo you need internally here from a people perspective. Why did you come to us and have this do this project that you could totally do yourselves? And the funny thing was, he said exactly what we had just talked about a moment ago, which was, I needed you to validate the way that we were feeling about it was correct. And it was interesting because I don't know why that upset me. Because I wasn't really helping to come with a solution. I basically was just giving them the ability to check a box saying, hey, we did our due diligence. That's basically what we were doing. Right.
Well, look, in medical terms, you were the second opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? There's value in that. And I would not in the least be, embarrassed about saying, okay, here's our invoice for that validation, because they needed to know that what they were doing was solid because somebody outside the company could come in and replicate it. That's the scientific method. Can you take your process and give it to some other party and have them do it and have the same outcome? And you did that for them, and that was worth money to them. So I don't know that I get pissed off about that.
I didn't have a problem at all giving them the invoice.
Yeah. But everybody's got a different way of trying to get around the whole idea of, I made that decision. Now I'm responsible for what happens.
I think that, that's interesting you bring that up. I think that's one of the biggest reasons why decisions don't get ultimately made, is because it ends up falling on one individual at some point, and they kind of have to be like, the axe coming down, right? And there's no other way to shirk that responsibility off to someone else. So basically, if things, go into the dumpster as a result of this decision,
right,
that's coming back on X individual. And I really do think that's one of the reasons that decisions don't get made, so much so that I was reading a book just recently. It's called The Challenger Sale. The Challenger Sale is it's not a sequel, but it was written by Neil Rackham, who did spin selling.
Right.
Yeah. And a lot of this data comes from this organization that used to be called CEB. So long story short, the reason I bring up this book is because one of the things that they identified through their research, and they met with something like 6,000 sales reps all over the world across 90 different industries or something like that. Well, what they've identified that, remember how back in the day when you'd be doing sales, or when you would be teaching someone sales, you would teach them to identify the decision maker, right? One sole person within the organization who's signing off. That doesn't exist today. What the book talks about through their research is that it's no longer one individual.
Right.
On average, it's 4.5 people involved in any corporate decision.
And some of them are influencers.
Correct.
They have a lot of weight to add to the conversation, which the decision makers actually rely on.
But correct. But one of the things the book talked about was there's no more single individual that you can pinpoint that, throws down the hammer, signs the check, signs the contract, right? It's a group decision. And think about how much that complicates the process getting to the point of coming to a decision, because, a lot of what we've talked about today is perhaps one individual.
Right.
Now, how do you deal with that when it's a group?
Well, that's what we used to call decision by committee,
Right.
which almost never went well. It's kind of a mob mentality on a corporate level. The decisions aren't the highest quality because you've got to entertain too many different opinions about it, and they never come off on time unless it's a critical emergency situation and everybody knows that meeting the deadline is more important than the decision. So yeah, right. I get that. And that's a challenge. I mean, that and a whole host of other things that have been kind of thrown in the mix with remote workers and people not being in one location. And yeah, so believe me when I tell you, if you are somebody who has to routinely make decisions, you're better off adopting this type of mentality about what you figure out before you render an outcome, and just run with it. In fact, I think I might have told you this. We might have talked about this a few shows ago, but one of the early books I read after I started this business and I got into the small business world, which I was didn't know much about coming out of corporate for so many years. But I read this book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And that book is so old. It was written back in 1945, I think, so and there's been some adaptations after that, but one of the early previous century American industrial tycoons that he interviewed had told him one of his secrets to success was, once I gather an appropriate amount of data and I make a decision, I never go back. I see it through. If it wasn't the right one, we learn from it. We do something else. But he goes, I just learned from people that I was around who constantly would arrive at a decision and then allow themselves to be talked out of it by other people in the room who maybe weren't happy with where that decision was going to go. And so now you had, okay, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this. So somebody else says, well, if you can change it once, you can change it again. And so now the person's flip-flopping back and forth. And ultimately, a real decision actually doesn't get made. And so the point of this story was, if you get comfortable doing the reasonable amount of research, getting input, you make the decision and you just say, this is what we're going with. We're not going back. Most of the time, it's the right one. A lot of times people confuse the wrong decision with poor implementation. So you make a great decision, right thing to do. You get the wrong people implementing it. You don't get the outcome you're looking for. Then they say, okay, well, I guess that wasn't the right decision. No, it was. We just didn't do a very good job of seeing it through.
Right. Yeah. As I think about this discussion today, I still think one of the things I took away was your two-step kind of process of how to, if you've already identified that, hey, maybe I struggle with making decisions. Maybe I'm driving the people around me freaking batshit crazy. I really like the way that you articulated that, which is, first and foremost, do a little kind of kumbaya on yourself. Go sit on the couch, go put the little nighty thing over your eyes, and just take a moment to really understand, what is it about yourself that does that? Why is it, is it a fear-based thing? And really understand the foundational behaviors behind yourself as to what got you there. Right. I think that's really good feedback. And then the second thing, in order to change it, creating a methodology that you can implement as often as possible, especially when it comes to decisions that maybe have a little weight behind it.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And decision-making doesn't have to be stressful or complicated. It just needs to be a known process. And if you can get comfortable with a process, knowing that you're not going to bat 1,000, okay, because nobody does, you will do a lot better than the alternative by just being consistent with your application. All right, folks, listen, thanks for being with us today. We hope you got a lot out of this conversation, because this is decision-making is something that pretty much everybody is faced with on a nominal, routine basis or on an important basis, regardless if you're in business, personal, anything, relational, doesn't matter. So hopefully you got some good tips out of today's show, and it will cause you to sit back and kind of redecide how you approach decisions so that you can start making good ones. So Travis, thanks for bringing this this topic forward. This is a good one. Folks, we will be around next week, same time, Tuesday, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And just stay with us and, find us on your favorite podcast station and subscribe. And that way you'll get notification whenever we get new stuff coming out. So Travis, take care. Thanks for this one. We'll talk to you soon.